The night I followed my wife, I was certain I was about to lose everything. I had the engine running, the headlights off, and 3 months of silence and suspicion sitting in my chest like a stone I could no longer carry. I told myself I just needed to know the truth. I told myself that whatever I found, I could handle it. I was wrong on both counts. My name is Daniel Mercer, and I've lived in Cedar Falls, Indiana my entire adult life. I grew up watching my father, a quiet man named Harold Mercer, who carried mail for 30 years through every season this town could produce. And I learned from him that the backbone of a decent life is simple. You work hard, you keep your word, and you trust the people you love. I carried those beliefs into my marriage to Maya without question, the way you carry something so familiar you forget you were even holding it. For nearly 9 years, our life on Elm Creek Road was not perfect, but it was honest. We argued about the electric bill and forgot each other's work anniversaries, and annoyed each other with habits neither of us could change. Maya left her shoes at the front door. I stayed up past midnight watching baseball games from decades ago. These were the textures of our life, ordinary and imperfect, and deeply ours. Then October came, and something shifted so quietly I almost missed it entirely. A Tuesday evening when Maya laughed softly at her phone and turned the screen face down before I could glance at it. I told myself it was nothing, but the next week she stepped outside in the cold to take a phone call with the back door pulled shut behind her. The week after that, I walked into the kitchen mid-conversation and the call ended, not dramatically, just quietly, the way a person ends something they do not want witnessed. And then there were the Saturdays. Every single Saturday evening at exactly 6:30, Maya would get dressed in her dark wool coat, pick up the same worn leather bag from the hook near the door, say 4 words, "I'll be back later," and leave. No destination, no invitation, no explanation beyond those 4 practiced words that began to sound, after enough repetitions, less like honesty and more like rehearsal. I tried to trust her. I reminded myself daily that Maya was a private person, that she had always kept certain pieces of herself close, and that privacy was not the same as deception. But the weeks kept passing, and the silence between us kept widening, and in the space where honest conversation should have lived, fear moved in and began building stories out of nothing. I started counting the minutes she spent on her phone. I started noticing which messages made her smile and which ones she read without expression. I started hearing betrayal in silences that perhaps carried no meaning at all. And one evening in late November, sitting across from her at the kitchen table after a dinner neither of us had spoken through, I set down my fork and asked the question that had been crushing me for weeks. "Maya, is there someone else?" She looked up slowly. The expression on her face was not guilt. It was not panic. It was something that looked, unmistakably, like genuine hurt. "What did you just ask me?" "You heard me," I said. "Just answer." Her jaw tightened. "No, Daniel, there is no one else." She stood up, washed her dish, and went upstairs without another word. I sat alone at that table for a long time, and the terrible thing, the thing I am most ashamed of, is that her denial did not relieve me. The doubt had roots now, and it did not need evidence to survive. A week later, on a cold Saturday in December with rain threatening all afternoon, I waited until her taillights disappeared around the corner of Elm Creek Road, and then I pulled out of the driveway and followed her. I kept 3 cars between us. My hands were tight on the wheel. The rain came down in thin, cold sheets across the windshield as I followed her through the town center, past Harbor Avenue, past the old Methodist church on Birch Street, and then out toward the edge of the city where the streets grew darker and buildings older and the spaces between streetlights longer. She parked along a curb in front of a modest brick building behind a low iron fence. I cut my lights and pulled over half a block behind her. I was expecting a restaurant, a hotel, an apartment building with a name that would confirm every fear I had been feeding in private for months. Instead, mounted near the entrance, in plain institutional letters, was a sign that read Riverside Care Center. I stared at it, a long-term residential care facility. soft light in the windows, a small winter garden near the entrance with bare rose bushes in neat rows. None of it matched any story I had told myself. I watched Maya walk toward the entrance, and then a side door opened and an elderly man came out slowly with the help of a nurse, moving with the deliberate, careful steps of someone for whom every movement is an act of effort and will. He was thin, pale. His coat hung loose on his shoulders. The moment Maya saw him, she stopped walking. Something in her posture broke open. The composed, capable woman I had built my life beside seemed to dissolve in an instant, and she crossed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around him and held on. The old man closed his eyes. His thin arms came up slowly and held her back. It was not what I had feared. It was something older and heavier than anything I had imagined. I got out of the car. I crossed the street. The lobby of Riverside Care Center smelled of antiseptic and old wood and something warm from a distant kitchen. Soft music moved through the corridors. I walked slowly until I heard Maya's voice from behind a partially open door near the end of a hallway, and I stopped. I knew I should leave, but then I heard words that nailed me to the floor. "I spent 20 years trying to forget you." Silence. "I know," said an older voice, rough and thin. "I hated you." Her voice broke on that word. "I know that too," the old man said, very quietly. I pushed the door open. The room was small and plain, lit by a single bedside lamp. Maya sat in a chair pulled close to a hospital bed. The elderly man lay against pillows, his face deeply lined and pale, his hands still on the blanket. Both of them had been crying, and as I stood in the doorway, something struck me with the force of a memory I had forgotten I was carrying. Years ago, early in our marriage, while sorting through a box of old photographs, Maya had shown me a picture for only a moment before placing it face down at the bottom of the box. A little girl in a yellow dress standing beside a tall man with strong hands and kind eyes. She had never explained it, and I had never asked. I was looking at that man now. Older, diminished by illness and time, but unmistakable. "Maya," I said. She turned. The color left her face. She looked at me the way a person looks when two of the most painful parts of their life collide without warning. "Daniel," she whispered. "You told me he was dead," I said. My voice was not angry. It was bewildered. And beneath the bewilderment, something heavier was beginning to form. The beginning of shame. Tears ran down her cheeks without apology. For a moment, she did not look like the strong woman I knew. She looked like a child who had been waiting a very long time for something that never came. "He was," she said softly. "To me, for a very long time, he was." Then she told me everything. Her father's name was Robert Calloway, and he had once been, she said, a man who tried. He coached her Little League team one summer. He made pancakes on Sunday mornings. He was not a villain from the beginning. But gambling came slowly, the way most destructions do. First as something manageable, then as something with its own gravity that pulled everything else in. The debts grew faster than anyone understood. Collectors began coming to their door on Fairview Street in Columbus, Ohio. Her mother, Patricia, worked 2 jobs and then 3. Maya, at 15 years old, was waking her younger sister Diane for school every morning and making sure there was food on the table every evening, and holding the household together with the quiet, desperate competence of a child who had no other choice. And then one morning, she came downstairs, and her father's coat was gone from the hook by the door, and she knew before a single word was spoken that he was not coming back. No letter, no call, no explanation, just absence, which is its own kind of violence. For years, the family heard only silence. Eventually, it became easier to say he had died, because the truth, that he had chosen to leave, was a wound that never fully healed and never fully closed. 3 months before that December night, Riverside Care Center had called Maya because her name was still listed as emergency contact on paperwork Robert had never updated. Heart failure, kidney disease, the kind of ending that does not reverse. She had ignored the first 2 calls. On the third, she answered. Something in the nurse's quiet, unhurried voice made her agree to come just once. She had come back every Saturday since. Not because she had forgiven him, not because 30 years of damage had been undone, but because she was 44 years old and she needed, before the door closed permanently, to understand why. To ask the questions she had carried since she was 15. To look him in the eyes and be seen by him one final time. She had said nothing to me because she did not yet have words for it herself. Because the shame of still needing a father who had failed her so completely was something she did not know how to explain to anyone, including the man she loved most. I stood in that hallway after she finished and leaned against the cold wall and stared at the ceiling and breathed. Then the old man's voice came from inside the room, weak and careful. "Daniel." I walked back to the doorway. Robert Calloway looked at me with quiet, watery eyes from his pillow. "She talks about you," he said. "Every time she comes. Every single visit." He paused to gather breath. "She talks about you like you are the best thing that ever happened to her." Those words landed somewhere deep and undefended in my chest. Because while I had spent 3 months constructing a story of betrayal, Maya had been sitting in this room carrying 30 years of grief and still speaking about her husband with love. She had been shielding me from her pain, and I had responded by doubting her. I stepped back into the hallway. I stood there alone for a moment with the weight of what I had done settling fully into my bones. Then Maya appeared beside me. She looked at me with exhausted, careful eyes, waiting for a verdict. I opened my arms. She walked into them, and something in her released that I had never felt before, something that had been held tightly for a very long time. She cried fully and completely, with her whole body, with 30 years of grief and 10 weeks of solitary Saturdays, and all the relief of finally being known. I held her and said nothing, because nothing was adequate. And because sometimes the most important thing we can do for the people we love is simply refuse to let go. In the weeks that followed, I went with her every Saturday. I sat in the corner of that small room and watched my wife do the hardest work a person can do. She was angry some days and gentle on others. She held Robert's hand while he slept and then sat in the car afterward in silence for 20 minutes before she could drive. She asked him questions he could not always answer. She told him things she had never said aloud to anyone. She did not arrive at a tidy resolution. She arrived at something more honest than that. An understanding that forgiveness does not mean the wound never existed, and that closure is not the elimination of pain, but the quiet decision to carry it differently. Robert Calloway passed on a Thursday morning in January. Maya was with him. The funeral was small and gray, held at Cedar Falls Memorial Cemetery beneath a sky the color of old pewter, with a cold wind moving through bare branches overhead. A minister read the words that are always read at endings like this one. When the service was over, Maya reached for my hand. She held it with a firmness that said everything the day had not allowed her to speak. I did not let go. On the drive home, the silence between us was different from any silence we had shared before. It was not the silence of strangers or of people afraid to speak. It was the silence of two people who had found their way through something difficult and were still, after everything, sitting side by side. Maya looked out the passenger window at the winter fields passing by, and after a long while said quietly, "I'm sorry I didn't tell you." "I'm sorry I stopped trusting you," I said. That was all, and it was enough. I still think about that rainy December night sometimes, about the man I was, sitting in a dark car with his lights off, building a case against the person who loved him most, about what I was so certain I would find, and about what I actually found when I walked through that door. Not betrayal, not the ending I had feared, but a woman carrying a wound so old and so private she had not yet found a way to speak it into the open air. A daughter, a grief 30 years in the making, and a love that had survived it all, not because it was perfect, but because it refused, even in the hardest moments, to give up. People are rarely hiding what we fear. Sometimes they are hiding what hurts more than we can imagine. And the greatest thing we can give the people we love is not the absence of doubt, but the willingness, when doubt comes, to choose presence over suspicion and to stay. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you love or a truth you needed to hear today, please subscribe to the Kind Soul Stories. Every week, we bring you stories of quiet courage, hidden grace, and the kind of love that does not require perfection, only persistence. Hit the subscribe button, share this with someone who needs it, and tell us in the comments what this story meant to you. Your heart found this channel for a reason. We are so glad you are here. This story teaches that assumption without communication is one of the most common and most damaging things we do to the people we love. It shows that the people closest to us often carry histories of pain so deep and so private that they do not yet have language for them, and that this silence is not deception, but survival. It illustrates the complexity of forgiving a parent who abandoned you, validating the experience of countless viewers who carry similar wounds. It demonstrates that the truest form of love is not the absence of difficulty, but the willingness, when doubt comes, to choose presence over suspicion and to stay.